كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. MashaAllah, welcome back to these lectures from the Wise University provided by White Thread Institute. So in the last session we were dealing with ijma', consensus, and we discussed quite a few things regarding the types of ijma' and what is the provability what's the provability of ijma' and so on. Now in this one we deal with what is the purpose of ijma' and where does it have to come from? Like, does it have to be based on something? Do you need a fundamental within the Sharia for it to be based on, or you can just come up with something else? So of course, if all the jurists, I mean this wouldn't happen, but if the jurist of the world, of the Muslim Ummah, had agreed on something that has no basis in the Sharia, in fact goes against the Sharia, then that ijma' wouldn't be counted either. So the ijma' and consensus is only what we call a hujjah and a proof for us, for the Muslim Ummah, as long as it's not something that people are making up from themselves, but or like just completely disregarding what it says in the Quran and Sunnah. It has to be something from the Quran and Sunnah, because the real legislator is Allah, right? Allah and His Messenger, they're the legislator. So Allah is the legislator, right? And nobody else has a right to legislate anything. All the jurists are doing is they're trying to understand what the legislator, Allah, intends here. If it's not clear for us, that's what we're trying to figure out. So that's their job. Their job is to try to reveal and to make clear what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have intended through the various different clues that He has provided us and the context that He's given us. That's essentially what they do. So that's why it's absolutely necessary that any mas'ala has to have a basis in the Quran and Sunnah. So then before the consensus can start, that's how it needs to be. Right? That's the understanding of it. So that's essentially what it is. So we were today, as I said, we were going to discuss the basis of the ijma', and it has to extend to something, and it can't be made up by the jurists. Right? That's very, very important. So there has to be some kind of qiyas and some kind of analogy that is based on something already found. And I'll give you some examples and you'll understand that when I more clearly, inshallah. But essentially this in Arabic is called sanadul ijma', right, where it extends from and where it has its basis from. Now the question now is, right, and I think it's a valid question, is that if everything that an ijma' has to formulate upon and a consensus can be made upon has to originally be from the Kitab and Sunnah, then what's the benefit of the ijma'? Then what's the benefit of the consensus? If it's already found Quran and Sunnah, then what's the benefit of the ijma'? And then, so why do you consider this to be some kind of independent source of the Sharia? So that's an important aspect to understand. There are two benefits of this. There are two independent benefits of ijma' over and above what is just found in the Quran and Sunnah, even if those same masail, same ahkam, same rulings were found in the Quran and Sunnah. So any hukm that is established from the Kitab and Sunnah or qiyas, right? So either three of those, if there's something directly established in the Quran, Sunnah, or it was established by way of qiyas, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, especially the first two, some of them, and qiyas nearly always, is going to be speculative because it's an endeavor. So if there are definitive masail in the Quran Sunnah, they're exempt from here, they're strong enough anyway. But anything where it's based on a qiyas, or it's based on something speculative from the Quran in terms of whether it has two meanings, so which meaning is intended, there's a word that has two possible meanings, which one is intended in the Quran? These are going to be questions that will arise, right? So that's speculative. If I take this, that's speculative. I take this, that's speculative. I have to do my best as a jurist to take whichever one I think is intended. I think is intended at least, but it's still a speculative idea. That's why you have difference of opinion here. So, if then later all the ulama, all the jurists come together and agree that it means this meaning, and they specify it to that meaning, or they say that it's this qiyas that works, that becomes ijma, and it becomes now definitive as opposed to just speculative anymore. So it will take a speculative ruling because there could be two or three, and since everybody's agreed with it, it becomes now qat'i. It becomes definitive. So now there's no longer any kind of speculation in there, because there can't be any doubt now. If all the jurists agree that it's this meaning, then what new idea is going to come about to give a new idea, another opinion about that, if everybody's agreed with that. So the benefit of it is that it will shut the door of any kind of ikhtilaf there, any kind of difference of opinion. It'll become fixed. And if there was, there are possibilities that there was already something qat'i, something definitive from before, an ijma would then just increase its definitiveness and conviction in it even more, right? So there's always a benefit. And number two, the second benefit is that it literally just then dispenses the need, and it gets rid of the need, you could say, from anybody later to have a different opinion on there. No jurist has to look into that issue again. There's an ijma. All the jurists, right, of the Muslim Ummah, they agreed to something after analyzing it and discussing it, and it made sense to them that we're going to go with this particular opinion on this. And we don't take this lightly. I mean, this only happens if everybody agrees, right? So then there's no need for any mujtahid afterwards to have a difference in there. So any generations, mujtahideen, overall, as long as it fulfills the quota for ijma as such, like everybody, then there's no need for anybody to do that later. Okay, so let's give a few examples of this now, right? Let's give a few examples of this. Number one, an ijma based on the Quran. So there's a verse in the Quran that says something, but it's unclear about whether it includes X, Y, and Z as well. It definitely includes, literally speaking, for example, the word ummahat, right? The word ummahat means your mothers, and that could just be talking about the mothers of the ummah, so every individual that this applies to, his mother or her mother, right? And then it says وَبَنَاتُ. So there's a verse in Surah An-Nisa, verse 23, حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ, that upon you are forbidden, meaning for marriage and intimacy, your mothers and your daughters, وَأَخَوَاتُكُمْ, and your sisters, right? So now, does mothers include grandmothers as well? Because grandmother is not mentioned, so it doesn't discuss ummahatu ummahatikum. It's just your mothers directly. Is that to be taken literally? It's only your mothers, and you can marry your grandmothers or great grandmothers, for example, or your granddaughters? Because your daughters are included, that they're haram, they are your unmarriageable kin. So that verse, because the basis is in there, there was an ijma then later that even that this actually shut the door, the ijma shut the door for anybody coming up with some weird idea later and saying, oh, it only says mothers, so grandmothers are fine, or granddaughters are fine. And I know that sounds a bit absurd that anybody would even think that, but you can't put it past anybody. I mean, with the kind of deviance that unfortunately people sometimes do come up with. So the ijma shut that door and said, no, this actually is so general and inclusive and am and universal that it includes all your mothers, meaning grandmothers, great grandmothers, and so on, right? As long as they're bloodline grandmother, it doesn't include somebody you might just call a grandmother who looks like a grandmother or something, and likewise a granddaughter. So the impermissibility of nikah, although the basis of it is established there, but it was speculative with regards to grandmothers and granddaughters, and only definitive according to your own daughters. ijma got rid of this speculative aspect of it, and it becomes now definitive that everybody is included in this case. Right. Okay. Next example is when it comes to the sunnah now, a basis in the sunnah. So this is, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man ibta'a ta'aman fala yabi'hu hatta yastawfiyahu." This is one of the narrations. There's a few others as well, which says that anybody who purchases a food product, he should now not resell it, meaning sell it again. Like if you bought it from someone as you're a retailer, so you buy it from your wholesaler, you're not allowed to sell it until you fully receive it, right? Which means that if I've just ordered it, if I have not even ordered it, for example, right, or if I have not received it in my liability, in my possession, I can't sell it yet. Right? I mean, there are ways to get around that, in the sense that there are other ways where you can make them your agent and so on, but we're not going to get into that. The basic idea is that you shouldn't be selling what you don't possess yet, because you may never possess it. And what are you selling? You're selling something which you don't have. So now this is speaking about food, right? The hadith is specifically speaking about a food item. Does this include other things as well? Right. So you can see that there's a basis. If it's not allowed in food items, then why be allowed in other? Why should it? If it's not allowed in food items, why should it be allowed in other items? But that was speculative. We didn't. You couldn't prove that beyond doubt, as in full conviction. So that's why there's a ijma and consensus that you can't sell anything before you take possession of it. So it's not allowed to sell things that you haven't taken possession of. Right. So so even though it's quite clear the hadith, still there was that possibility. There was that possibility that it doesn't include that. Now the thing is that this hadith, even though it's quite clear, right, in terms of clarity, it's quite clear. But actually, the reason why it's speculative is not because it might include X, Y, and Z because it's unclear. No, it's quite clear. But the reason why it's unclear. Not unclear. The reason why it is what it is, why we need an ijma' here, is why it's speculative, is because this hadith is a khabar wahid. So somebody might find another reason to then dismiss this, because khabar wahids can be dismissed under certain conditions. And in some cases, you'll see that when we deal with qiyas and so on. So the hadith wasn't established through tawatur, right? So that's why as soon as you got an ijma' on that fact, this hadith, even though it's khabar wahid, the message in it now becomes mutawatir, right? And mutawatir means it becomes definitive, and nobody can doubt that. Now the last one I want to mention quickly is ijma' that is based on qiyas, right? That is based on a qiyas. So there's an ijma', there's something you can understand from qiyas already, but the ijma' just ratified it and solidified it. Simple thing is that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned 6 products, dates and salt and gold and silver and wheat and barley, that they have to, if they're sold for one another, meaning for their own type, so wheat is sold for wheat, dates are sold for dates, then they have to be equal that you sell. So you can't sell a kilo of good quality dates for 3 kilos of bad quality dates. It's not allowed. That exchange is not allowed. You can sell it for money and then rebuy the other ones with money. That would be fine, but you can't sell them, and you can't have credit in this as well. These are ribawi products. Now, is rice included in that? Now, a lot of people will look at these and say, yeah, rice is very similar to wheat and barley, and I think so rice should not be allowed as well, by way of extension of that analogy. However, that's speculative ultimately, right? Because it's by way of analogy. There's no clear proof about that. However, there's an ijma' now. There's been a consensus that rice is included. So now, if there's an ijma' on rice being included, then it means that becomes as definitive as the other products, right? And nobody can exclude that anymore because it becomes definitive. So to round it up, usually there is a base ruling somewhere, right? And just to ratify it, or to ratify something related to it, to strengthen it and to make it definitive, is where ijma' helps as well. So that's another way of ijma'. So that gives us a better understanding. What we're going to be looking at right now is the people, we've been talking about all the mujtahideen agreeing to a certain view. So what are the conditions and qualifications of these mujtahideen? What do they have to be? Who do they have to be? What kind of qualifications do they have to have? So as I said before, anybody can call themselves a mujtahid, but this is requiring somebody with proper mujtahid, somebody with the qualities, so that's very important. So the first condition they mention is that أن يكون مجتهدا صالحا. So they need to be righteous. They need to be from the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and clearly they have to be religious, because if they're not religious, then their whole ijtihad as to which direction they're going to go, because sometimes a lot of this can be subjective, based on a person's commitment to certain things, and the mujtahideen that are going to be acceptable are going to be those who are committed to their faith. So that's number one, that they have to be capable mujtahideen. They have to be capable, and they have to be qualified as mujtahids. That means other jurists also consider them to have this level. Okay, so that's the first thing. Number two, their judgment, etc., cannot be based on just whim and fancy. It can't be based on, they should not be guilty of innovations. They should not have deviance in that regard, and that a person could maybe challenge them for, or assume that this is all based on some kind of underlying motive, or for some due to some pressure that they are bowing down to. So it can't be a sahibu bid'ah, it can't be a person of innovation, because the Prophet ﷺ has considered and mentioned that the person of innovation is not praiseworthy in the Sharia, is not liked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's considered to be a place of criticism. So how can that then be accepted, for a person who's going to be contributing to the ijma'? So anybody like that, then even if they go against all the other mujtahideen, then they're not counted anyway. So the ijma' and the consensus can still be formulated without them, because you only need proper mujtahideen who are not guilty of any kind of innovation. These are all very closely related anyway. I think they just got slight nuance difference between them. The third one they say is that لا يكون فاسقا. He can't be a transgressor. Now that's just maybe he has correct views, or maybe his ideology is fine, but they're known to be unrighteous. They're known to be sinners. They are transgressors. They are guilty of major sins, or sometimes they even explain this as being maybe somebody persistent in minor sins. The reason for all of that is, if anybody is like that, it's strange when people aren't going to want to take such a person's opinion. It's going to become doubted. His uprightness, such a person's uprightness is, I guess, comes into question. So a person's worthiness of being a jurist, especially good enough to contribute to an ijma', is established, and to be able to do qiyas and so on, is established by his adala and uprightness. We talked about uprightness when it came to the case of the hadith, for example, as well, that the rawi, the transmitter, needs to have uprightness. Right, the fourth point is actually very different for all of this. It's that the ijma' must be from all the mujtahideen of that time. So let's just say that there's one mujtahid who is capable, righteous, and has all of the qualities, but he goes against the ijma'. Then that would actually encroach on the whole ijma'. That person could mess up the whole ijma' as such. I mean, I doubt that would ever happen, where there would be like a righteous, capable, qualified individual who go against everybody else who's qualified, to get that kind of an issue where just one person. But if there was somebody like that, then that means that the ijma will not work. It's literally one person blackballs it, it's finished. It can't be the case. It's one person or 100 people. Let's just say that there's 10,000 mujtahids and one person goes against it, one qualified one goes against it, or 100 go against it. It's the same thing. It can't be done. So because that the reason for that, you might be wondering why. I mean, this isn't about majority vote. This is to literally get a consensus. And the purpose is that, and the point is that if there is 1 or 2 or 5 people who are saying otherwise, then because it's about ratifying something speculative, the only way to prove that it becomes definitive is everybody agrees. So as long as somebody is still disagreeing, then it means that it remains speculative. So technically, it can't. You can't get definitiveness out of it and conviction. So being capable, being righteous, not being unrighteous, not being guilty of major sins, not being guilty of reprehensible innovation, and so that's what it be. And then for the ijma as a whole, everybody must agree. I hope that really drives the point home. Now, there are what I want to discuss now is there are a number of conditions that others have put, other madhahib and others have put in place to say that ijma must also uphold these conditions, whereas our Hanafi scholars do not necessarily agree with them and do not restrict ijma because of that. So these are essentially several points that we do not consider to be conditions for ijma to be valid. So keep that in mind. We don't consider these to be conditions, while others do consider them to be conditions. We don't consider them to be conditions. First one, there's some who believe only in the ijma of the Sahaba, nobody else. So essentially, once the Sahaba have gone, then there can't be any ijma afterwards, right? Because ijma was only until the Sahaba, and after Sahaba there can't be an ijma because nobody's capable of doing so. We don't believe that's the case. So there could be an ijma after the time of the Sahaba, right? There could have been, there has been ijma after the Sahaba. Number two, there's some people who actually restrict the ijma to the family of the Prophet ﷺ. So only the itratul Rasul, which means the family descendants of the Prophet ﷺ, and specifically that's not even the whole family. I think that they consider that this is only Ali radiallahu anhu, Fatima radiallahu anha, Hassan, Hussein radiallahu anhum, and their children. So only they are considered to be qualified to ever do an ijma. So it has to be an ijma of the Ahlul Bayt or Al Bayt, right? Again, we do not consider that a condition. That's a very restricted condition, and that's not something that we agree with. That's not a condition for us. Number three, they say that أن يكون في أهل المدينة, that an ijma has to be from the people of Medina Munawwara, right? If it's from anybody else, that's not acceptable. Again, that is not a condition for us, and we negate that. Apparently, this is something that has been popularized as being the view of Imam Malik, rahimahullah. However, there's a number of Malikis who've actually rejected this being Imam Malik's view, although it's some people have related that as being his view. Others have said no, that's not the case. Ibn Bukayr, Abu Yaqub al-Razi, Abu Bakr ibn Maniyat, I think his name is, At-Tayalisi, Qadi Abu al-Faraj, Qadi Abu Bakr, etc. All of these reject that it's from Imam Malik. But either way, just so that you know, it doesn't have to be. It could be the people of Kufa, it could be the people of the world, right? It has to actually be the people of the world. It's not just restricted to them. Another condition some have placed is that, let's just say that there was an ijma in that first century at a particular time, right? Let's just say in 167 Hijri, right? Now, the people who are involved in that, all the mujtahideen of that time, some were 7 years old, some were 80, some were 50, there were 30-year-olds in there as well, for example, right? Now, there's a view that says that once they've all agreed, and let's just say they all gave an agreement, right? They all agreed. Some people, they push for this idea, or they believe that it's a condition, that none of them should turn back before they die. What this number 4 is saying is that anybody involved in that particular ijma of that time, meaning all the mujtahideen, all the mujtahids of that time, a whole generation needs to pass to prove that this ijma is valid, right, without any of those recanting, turning back. So those who agreed to the ijma in their lifetime, and for a whole generation, it's going to take a whole generation to prove that, none of them can recant and say, okay, we were mistaken. Because remember, for us to get a consensus from everybody, every mujtahid of a particular era, you can't get it. It's not that easy to do so. It's very, very, very difficult. So everybody who's agreed, they must have put so much thought into this to have agreed in the first place. So it's going to be very difficult that you're going to then get people to come back, right? So anyway, the point is that they say that everybody of those must die eventually after they've agreed. So for us to then say yes, that's true, because look, none of them have recanted. Because once the ijma has taken place, they say that if one of them did recant, then it breaks the ijma, right? So that's why let's wait until the end. We're saying that's not a condition, right? That is not a condition. That nobody's ever mentioned that, because all the evidences that show that ijma is a proof for us don't put that condition in, don't even indicate towards that condition. So now the difference of opinion between these two views will play out if there was a recanting, if there was somebody who turned back within their life and said, yes, I take my words back. Right, so that was number 4. Hopefully that's clear. Number 5 now is some people put a condition that there for whatever opinion the ijma is going to be enacted upon, they أن لا يسبقه اختلاف سابق في المسألة. They put that as a condition, that there should not have been an ikhtilaf and a difference of opinion on this, through different opinions from the mujtahideen before this ijma, which essentially is saying that it must have been an agreed upon issue all the way. Subhanallah. I'm assuming that if it wasn't agreed upon issue all the way, then why would there be a difference of opinion later? Okay, we're not going to call it ijma unless you formally make that into an ijma. But essentially they say that's a condition. We're saying that's not a condition either, right? So for us, we would say that even if there was a difference of opinion between the early mujtahideen, even the Sahaba, and they did not do an ijma on it, later scholars can still take one opinion, later mujtahideen can still take one of those opinions and do an ijma of it if it was required. Now remember, practically speaking, to bring the mujtahideen together, every mujtahid is not an easy task, right? So if that did ever happen, it's going to happen on a very, very important, significant, relevant issue. They're not going to just try to get an ijma on any issue where there's other opinions are plausible as well, right? So again, a lot of these things are probably not even possible in the practical world, because it just be cancelled out, to be honest. Because if there's been a difference of opinion and then they had an ijma occur on a particular opinion, it must have been for a very, very, very significant reason. Otherwise, let all the opinions carry on. The Shafis, Hanafis, Malikis, Hanbalis have difference of opinion, and we're living together. There's not a problem with that. There's no need to bring an ijma on one thing and get everybody to agree to that. Mashallah, people are in harmony, they're living together, so it's not an issue. So we don't see that as a condition. In fact, most of the ijma, many ijmas that are taking place have taken place because there was a difference of opinion before, and now we wanted to fix an opinion. right? So it's not a condition that there should not have been an ikhtilaf beforehand for this ijma to be valid. That is not that is not opinion, right? Now let's look at that on the flip side of it, that if there is an ijma on any particular issue, right, whether there was an ikhtilaf on it before or not, right? So let's just say that they agreed and there was a consensus. Once there's a consensus on this, then it would mean, and it has to mean, right, according to us and everybody, is that any other opinions after that on this issue is batil. It's void. It can't be entertained, because once an ijma happens, then it's as good as, it's as good as being convincing, and you can't entertain any other views about that. Well, that's definitely there for sure, right? So there can't be anybody. It can shut the door. Literally, an ijma can shut the door to any more ijtihad on that particular issue, right? But there's been ijma in very few issues, so the door of ijtihad, has been open and was open then. Right, now let's move on in the leftover time that we have to discuss a few other things. Maratibul ijma', right? Which ijma is the strongest? I think we've probably got some idea about this already from what we've studied already, I mean the Sahaba, etc. But just to put this a bit more formally, which ijma is the strongest? So there are three maratib, right? There are three levels. There's al-martabatul aqwa, al-martabatul wusta, obviously, and al-martabatul dunya, right? Dunya means the lowest. So al-martabatul aqwa, that's the highest level one, the strongest one in that sense, the most noble one, is whenever there's a full qawli or fi'li, like everybody, every sahaba, from the sahaba. So when the companions have 100% agreed by statement, or number two, by action, by doing something, and reached a consensus, then that is the highest level of consensus. That's called al-martabatul aqwa, the strongest level. And it's important to know this, because the hukam of that is that this is just like Quran and Sunnah. It's meaning mutawatir almost, that this is a hujjah maqtu'atun bihi, which means that it is an evidence which is maqtu'a, which means definitive, just like ayat and ayat of the Quran, khabar mutawatir, such that if anybody rejects this, you can actually clearly call them kafir for that. Al-martabatul wusta is going to be again from the Sahaba this time, again, but it's their tacit ones, where many of them, some of them have gone for a statement, and the others have not provided any kind of rejection to that. Or they've all, the active ones have actually gone ahead and done an action and shown it through their action that they agreed to something, and the others have not rejected it. So that's the tacit one from them. That one is got a slight difference of opinion, right? So whether it's definitive or not, there is a difference of opinion, and we've discussed that before already anyway. The third one, which is the lowest level, is basically anything besides that. So this is going to be about the ijma of anybody after the Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum, the jurists of every time, when they perform an ijma on a particular issue. So that one is considered also to be an hujjah, right? According to the majority of the fuqaha, according to the majority of jurists, they actually consider this also to be dalil, but not a definitive evidence. So anybody besides the Sahaba, they say that this is not necessarily going to be definitive. So if that was not clarified before in the earlier discussions I gave, now this becomes clear here, right? That there is, according to the majority of the fuqaha, they say that yes, we're still going to accept this as evidence, but it's not going to be to the same level as the Sahaba one, right? So this isn't going to be dalil qati. Now, why should you worry about that? Well, because you're studying, that's why you need to know this, but otherwise in practice we still have to, it's still obligatory. So in terms of amal and practice, it's obligatory, but if there were, the only point of knowing whether it's qati, which means definitive or not, is because what it does is that it creates that slight speculative nature to it, which takes it out of that. So then if somebody did reject it, you can't call them kafir. That's really the big point here, right? Now, one of the reasons for this as well is that, there's as I said, there is a view that there's a group that don't believe in any ijma beyond the Sahaba. So the fact that they wouldn't agree to an ijma like this at all, right? Remember, I told you, although the majority don't agree with that view, but there is that view. So that would literally take away the conviction aspect, the qat'iyyah, the definitiveness of ijma of non-Sahaba, because there's a group that do not agree on the ijma of non-Sahaba. So that, you can say, hinders our conviction completely. So it creates that slight speculative aspect to it, which means that we're still going to consider it to be necessary to act upon, and it's going to prove many things, but it's just that if somebody, one of them goes and rejects it, we're not going to call them kafir. Right? So one of those who believe that only Sahaba can do ijma, if they reject this, we can't call them kafir on this case. We're going to call them wrong. We're going to say you're wrong, right? And you've got a very short-sightedness in this regard, but we're not going to call them kafir. To finish off the discussion for today, remember, all of this discussion was in hindsight, right? Because I believe today it's going to be like virtually impossible to get everybody to do an ijma. So now the ijma that has taken place, obviously it took place definitely during the time of the Sahaba. So we have numerous cases where after the Prophet ﷺ departed this world, and so did Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, his time there were quite a few upheavals and chaos, and you had to sort all of that out. You had to bring stability back, and that was just over two years. And then Umar radiallahu anhu, in his time, mashallah, he had a smooth playing field, and that's where he managed to clarify so much and bring an agreement on many things. So that happened then. Now we are not there, we are now here. We can only receive reports of an ijma. We did not see the ijma happening. We were not present. So for us now, it's about accepting a report that, hey, there's an ijma on this issue, and they agreed on this issue, and they had a consensus on this issue. So now there's a whole level of historicity and authenticity in transmission. That's an additional element. So ijma is different for us today than it was for the people in the time of the Sahaba or the Tabi'een, because they would have observed this, right? And if they didn't observe it, well, they were just closer to the time. So we are 1400 years and multiple, like 30 to 40 generations away maybe, right? So now for us, if somebody has transmitted and related to us the ijma, that the Sahaba did ijma on something, right? Then, and that transmission of the Sahaba having consensus on something has come down to us and passed down to us through tawatur, right? Through such widespread, contiguous, successive transmission, then that for us also is going to be hujjah qat'iyyah. It's going to be definitive evidence. And that means we have to do it, of course, and it means that anybody who rejects that is going to be kafir, because you're rejecting a mutawatir. It's almost like rejecting a verse of the Quran or mutawatir hadith, because that's essentially what it is, right? And that would be like a hadith anyway, or like a report from the Sahaba, but through tawatur, right? So, for example, the Quran being the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the salat being fard, how definitive is that? That's amazingly definitive. There's no doubts about that. Nobody can voice a doubt about that, except crazy people, right? Nobody serious will voice a doubt about that. And the second and third option is, that let's just say that the ijma was transmitted to us through a reliable kind of source, that the Sahaba agreed on something, relied upon transmission, but they're more ahad. It's not through tawatur, right? It's not through tawatur. They're not widespread continuous transmission, but we've got it through ahad, right? So after the Sahaba's time, it's just one or two people that transmitted this, then it may have increased or whatever. Of course, that can't remain qat'i anymore in the sense of definitiveness. It will be speculative. And just like most of the khabar wahid narrations, they are speculative anyway. Now, you still have to practice upon that. It still tells you something that you still have to practice. It gives wujub, etc. It's just that if somebody did reject that, you can't consider them kafir anymore. Some of the examples of that is that there is Abida as-Salmani rahimahullah. He says that the Sahaba, they did ijma on the fact that you have to be regular on 4 rakats before Dhuhr. Now, the Shafis don't agree with that one, whereas we do. But we can't call anybody kafir for rejecting that idea, although we accept it. But we can't call somebody kafir for doing that because they don't accept it. They don't consider that to be strong enough because it's not through tawatur. It was through certain, and they, according to their studies. Another example is to marry a sister after a person has divorced a sister. So, you know, it's prohibited to marry 2 sisters at once. So essentially, if somebody was married to one and he divorced her, and she's in her iddah, her waiting period, it's still haram for him to marry her sister while he's still in the iddah of her sister, right, his first wife. Only after she clears the iddah, then her sister becomes halal for him to marry. So we consider that still haram because we believe that there was an ijma' on there, but that ijma' has not been reported down, transmitted down through as strong as the first one. That's why there are other views on this. And there are other examples as well. Like, for example, if somebody got married and they got together in a room and had khalwa sahiha, right? That they had some time alone, then we would say that the mahr becomes wajib regardless of whether they've consummated the marriage or not. And there is an ijma' on that related by Abida as-Salmani and so on. Okay, the last one then is that if it's come down through a very weak chain, right, not a strong chain at all. So this middle one was a strong chain, right, but it wasn't tawatur, right? So mutawatir has to be usually sahih anyway. The mashhur, that one is generally sahih. Those that are weak chains, then subhanAllah, you can have multiple weak chains, but that's not going to be considered a hujjah. And that would then, you deal with them the same way as you deal with other ahadith. So you could still take that for some kind of inspiration or guidance or whatever, but you can't legislate anything by that. So that gives us an idea, and I think that rounds up this discussion very well. So jazakallahu khair, inshallah we'll see you for the next discussion in the next session, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.